Well, this is going to be the end of phase one of these Basstravaganza videos. The ones I posted so far are made from some of the first GoPro video I ever shot. But I felt like I was giving Kennedy Lake a bad reputation with episode 10. We got chased off the lake twice in a row by storms and rain, and poor Humpty hardly got to catch any fish at all. He went running home with his tail between his legs. So over the next couple of years, I went back to Kennedy Lake a number of times to shoot more video. Someday I hope to take the time to edit it out into more Basstravaganza episodes, but not now. I'm burned out from too much editing. So I decided to select out a few special clips from the newer Kennedy Lake video and condense it all into like 2 minutes with the fast forward button. Then I'd let Humpty catch a fish or two and tack it all onto the end of episode 10. But when I went through my raw video archive, there were so many special moments that I couldn't possibly condense them all into 2 minutes or even 10. Some of the freeze frames are like Japanese paintings. So I just picked out a hodgepodge of clips and spliced them together, basically in the order they were shot. It'll give you an idea of the massive editing job I have ahead of me if I decide to continue making these Basstravaganza videos. This is all just from one lake. So this is my little tribute to Kennedy Lake. One thing this video proves is that it doesn't rain every day at Kennedy Lake. Don't give up on this place just because you get rained out. If you're out on the water when the sun comes out and the wind dies down, it can be a stupendous place to explore. Another thing that it proves is that Kennedy Lake is not totally dead. Not yet. No matter what some people might think. Don't give up on it just because you happen to get skunked once. If you figure it out and go to the right place at the right time, even a dimwit like Humpty Dumpling can catch a fish or two. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea.
I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea.
Thinking I've never been here before, thinking there might be fish, and I hooked into something big. Holy smokes!
I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea.
I might have to stop calling this the Dead Sea. Well, that's enough of that. I'm going bonkers from editing, so I'm going to take a break for a while. But first I wanted to mention a few things. This Basstravaganza concept actually started out a long time ago. I once had a job, if you can believe that. Actually, I had lots of jobs. A shout out to all the wonderful people I worked with over the years. But I got tired of sitting in a cubicle, so I decided to go fishing. I'd already created the Humpty character in my mind, and I'd already changed my email to Humpty D. In 2010, I retired from my job and trailered my bullshit boat behind my Volvo on a big fishing trip all across North America. I took a little still camera and a tiny netbook computer with me, and every night I'd type out on my little netbook computer a recount of the day's events and post it to a blog along with pictures I'd taken that day. So that blog was the original Basstravaganza, and it's still posted on the internet. It's called Basstravaganza 2010, and you can find it with Google. I moved back to BC the next year, and I tried to continue the text with images blog idea the next couple years. You can also find these if you Google for Basstravaganza 2011 and Basstravaganza 2012. And then I decided to change my blog concept into a video series focused on a grumpy old guy who fishes with homemade lures. But first I had to learn how to make lures that fooled fish, and then I had to learn how to run a GoPro, and then I had to learn how to edit video, and then I had to learn how to publish video. So it took a little while, but now I finally started publishing this video series on YouTube as Humpty's Basstravaganza. I want to make this clear because there are lots of other entities on the worldwide interweb, and some of them have similar titles to mine. And apparently some of them are porn sites, but they have nothing to do with me. My 3 blogs are here. And my videos are on YouTube if you search for Humpty's Basstravaganza. I've been recording a lot of GoPro since I shot the stuff I published so far. I just bought an 8 terabyte remote hard drive to hold more storage for my raw video. I'll never get around to editing all of it, but I wanted to publish a little bit of it just to see if I could pull it off and see if anybody's interested. Hopefully I'll find the time and energy to continue editing out more episodes, but not now. I'd like to thank YouTube for the opportunity to publish my video to a larger audience. They get to sell stuff in the sidebars that I would never buy, and I get to show videos they would never shoot and say things they would never say. So it seems to be working. I've been editing and posting up episodes, but I've never once looked on YouTube to see if there are any comments or questions. Now that I'm done with this batch, I'll try to look over my YouTube vids. If there are any intelligent comments or questions, I'll try to respond. Snarly hater screed will be ignored. Messages from insanely gorgeous and fabulously wealthy Parisian supermodels who are infatuated with bass fishing will be pushed right to the top of the list. Meanwhile, Humpty is on to other things. He needs to get back to developing new lures and getting out on the water to test them. And he needs to get away from looking at video monitors. Whatever I do next, it won't be editing. They say that looking at video monitors for too long is bad for your eyes. And my vision's starting to get a little bit blurry. So I'm going to go outside somewhere and go fishing before I go blind.